Hey everybody, welcome to Bassoonists Talk Etudes. This is series 3 in our set of discussions about all things bassoon and related to bassoon. And our task with this series is to help you prepare different types of technical etudes or concert etudes that you may be working on. And our first part that we're addressing today, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague here in a second, is preparing what we call a pre-practice routine. So take it away, Dr. Bennett Cameron.
Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Bennett Cameron, as Dr. Bellamy just said, and I teach at the University of Texas at Arlington. And right now I'm going to walk you through my pre-practice routine when I'm preparing an etude for the first time. And it's the same etude, or it's the same practice that I teach my students to go through as well. So what we're going to take a look at today is Weissenborn 4. It's one of those deceptively difficult early Weissenborn etudes. So here it is, number 4 in the middle of the page. So we're going to walk through a lot of different things just to familiarize ourselves with the etude and set ourselves up for sight reading success. So that way when we see something on the page, we're not flummoxed by it. We don't have to hesitate. We don't have to stop and think, oh my gosh, what is that? Because you already know what's on the page. So sight reading isn't really sight reading. It's informed sight reading. That's the best way to do it. So let's take it look at the first few things. Let's take a look at the key. In this case, we see one sharp. We see that it starts on D and B, and then that it ends on G. So this is kind of a tricky one. It doesn't start on G, but it has one sharp, but it does end on G. So that tells me we are in G major. Let's now take a look at the time signature. The time signature, no big deal here, 3/4, 3 beats in the measure, quarter note gets the beat. I feel pretty good about that. Let's take a look at the range now. So let's take a scan and we're going to look for the lowest note in this etude. All right, I think I've spotted it. I think it's this G, G2. I'm comfortable with that note. Hopefully you are too. And now let's scan for the highest note that we see. All right, so we've got an E, got a D, no big deal, going, clef change. We've got a G4 right there, a high G, keep going. Ooh, now we have an A. Continuing to scan through the etude, I see that that's the highest note. So if I were, gonna practice this, I would probably run a G scale from G2 and then just go ahead and hit that ninth at the very top. So run that G scale all the way up to A and back down to G to get myself ready and feeling comfortable with that range.
I have a question for you about the range. So if you were looking at this etude, or if I were looking at this, and I were really comfortable from G2 up to G4 that you just identified, but say that A was a new note for me, what would you recommend doing about that? Do I just play it when it comes up in the music, or is there something that you think I should do beforehand?
So what I like to do is when I'm learning a new fingering or teaching someone a new fingering, I like to talk through it first. So I would finger the G, and then I would move up to fingering the A. I favor the full A fingering. So it's hook 'em horns, or my favorite is quiet coyote on the bottom. So it's 2, 3, and then the B flat key. A and C sharp in the back, 1, 2, 3, resonance key. And so we finger A, we finger G. We do it slowly, so we have plenty of time to think and our fingers are not confused. We finger A, we finger G, and once you feel really comfortable fingering those two notes, then we want to go ahead and play the notes tongued first so that you have time to think in between them. And I would do that 5, 6, 15 times until I feel really good about it. And then once I feel good tonguing both notes, we start to slur. And that's how I introduce new notes. In this particular setting, we're actually not approaching the note from G, we're approaching it from C. And so what I would do is I would play C4, then A, and then I would gradually work on slurring to them. And once I've got myself, and then I would also work on including the note that comes after the A. And then in my private practice, I would also be working on making sure that I can get there from G sharp, so I can do it diatonically, chromatically, and as it appears in the repertoire. It's a great question, Dr. Bellamy, thanks. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is the roadmap. That's what musicians call repeats, da capos, all those kinds of things. So let's take a quick scan through this. We lucked out on this one. There's not a whole lot of a roadmap. We start at the beginning and then we end at the end. So we don't have to worry about repeats. But one of the time-related things I do want to talk about are these fermatas and these railroad tracks, or caesuras as they're actually formally called. I like railroad tracks. And so that's just something you want to be ready for. We want to understand the difference between a fermata over a note, which makes you hold the note longer, or a caesura that's not over a note. So that means you just kind of sit there and contemplate life in a musical way before continuing on. So we want to be ready for all of those fermatas, caesuras, and understand what they mean. All right, let's talk about the varying articulations and releases in this particular etude. I see a lot of slurs. I feel pretty comfortable with slurs. All right, now let's talk about the different accidentals we're going to look at. So we know we have an F sharp in the key signature. Let's scan no accidentals on the first line, no accidentals on the second line. On the third line, we get to a C sharp. We're in tenor clef here now. I feel okay about C sharps. We got another C sharp. This is pretty good, but a lot of times in Weissenborn and other pieces, we'll see double sharps or double flats or like E sharps, which is kind of a funky note for us at first. And you want to make sure that you've looked through the etude and that you're not surprised by any of the accidentals you see, that you know how to finger them. You might want to practice them out of context before you jump in to make sure you feel comfortable with it. Okay, now let's talk about the rhythm and the subdivision. So as I mentioned before, we're in 3/4. It's a pretty straightforward meter for us. So I see a lot of eighth notes, a lot of quarters, dotted notes. If those are new to you, I would think through them. Make sure you know how to subdivide them. Make sure you know how to count them. Also, we have triplets right there on beat 3. So we want to make sure that we're fairly comfortable switching back and forth between duples or eighth notes and triples or the triplets. All right, now let's talk about clefs. I mentioned this briefly earlier. We have some bass clef here, and then in the second line, we switch to tenor clef. Then we switch back to bass clef. So we want to be really comfortable switching. And if it were me, I would practice the last few notes of the one clef and the first few notes of the other clef out of context before I jump in so that I don't get cleft up, as my students say. No one likes to get cleft up. All right, let's talk about some of the other things on the page, some of the text on the page. Let's start with the tempo. This is andante sostenuto. So composers usually like to give us some indication of how fast or slow it should go, and then some kind of modifier. So in this case, we have andante, which means walking tempo. So, just kind of think about how you'd walk. And then sostenuto, and we have to ask ourselves, does sostenuto mean slower or faster? Because it's usually one variation or the other. And when I think sostenuto or sustain, that makes me think that it's going to be a little bit slower than andante. All right, we have a piano here, no mysteries there, dolce. If I didn't know what that meant, I would Google it, but I do know what it means, so we can say effectively that it means sweetly. Poco, that means a little. So it means just a little forte. So like a mezzo forte, but maybe a little bit more so, a little sweeter than a forte perhaps. And then here we have an abbreviation, espress, which doesn't mean coffee. I wish it did, but instead it means espressivo. So that means with lots of vibrato, lots of feeling, lots of emotion. Diminuendo, piano, mezzo forte, diminuendo. Okay, and then at the very end we have retard, which I think 99% of musicians know what that is, so we'll move on. I feel pretty good about that. Last but not least, I want to talk about any embellishments or ornaments that may exist in this piece. So let's take a look. Let's scan through this piece for any trills, turns, mordents, or grace notes that we might see. Scanning, scanning, scanning. I don't see any, so we're off the hook. If there were any grace notes or mordants or other embellishments in here, I would 100% leave them out on my first reads through, because you need to get to know the etude before you start going crazy and adding all of these embellishments. So at this point in time, I would be ready to sit down and think about playing the etude. So there we go. That's my pre-practice routine.
I think it's sometimes it can be difficult to remember all of these different things. So I know a number of people might be used to the idea of a STAR acronym for sight reading, signs, working through all of these different, like creating your own mnemonic device. The way that I remember it is we think about the elements of music. I don't know if you remember having those sort of like ingrained in your head from an early age, but I look through what are the things that, what can I note about the melody? What can I note about the harmony? What can I note about the rhythm? And then form, timbre, are there different colors, texture, style? And that's my little 7-step process. So I
Nice.
think they're the same things that you talk about. We use slightly different words.
And I think that, every successful musician has a pre practice routine of some kind, some way that they look through the music and set themselves for success up before they play.
Well, thank you for walking us through that, and thank you everybody for joining us on our little crash course in a pre-practice routine.